Today's edition of the podcast is brought to you by Coach Me Plus. Coach Me Plus is the leader in athlete management software and a product that I've been lucky enough to be using for a little over a year now. Only rivaled by the impeccable customer service that Kevin and his staff provides, Coach Me Plus's ability to constantly be amoeba-like in their ability to mold and matriculate what you're trying to get across and bring together is absolutely fantastic. Their constant pursuit of better ways and better methods and innovations and progress to their own product is absolutely fantastic. Go over to coachmeplus.com. Check out what they got, guys. It's something that I guarantee you won't be disappointed with. Hello and welcome to the podcast. Guys, today we've got an awesome talk with Carvajal Performance's Jorge Carvajal. We're going to get into all sorts of cool things. But one thing that's going to be different is we're going to talk surfing, a different sport, a different avenue, and how George works with the athletes is really looking at the differences in the sport and how he works with these athletes. So that was fascinating to me. And then he gets into some self-reflection and what brought him into doing a bunch of more decelerative work with his athletes. He works with a bunch of surfers, and he also works with a bunch of tactical people and team sport athletes. So gets into this self-reflection as to why he ended up going down this path and then what he's now doing with Thank you so much for being with us today, my friend.
Glad to be here. Thanks for having me, Jay.
Hey, so, let's real quick just give an introduction, tell people a little bit of your story, and we'll go from there, brother.
Yeah, so my story is kind of very traditional, I guess, my route. I was a high school athlete. I played high school football as a quarterback. Got recruited as a defensive back because I didn't have the requisite height. I ended up getting a couple of offers for Division II and Division III schools. And I had always dreamed of walking on at Florida. I wanted to play at UF. And that's what I did. I ended up as a walk-on athlete and playing on special teams, the kamikaze. And what happened was, if you play special teams, the only way to really play on a scout team, special teams, is to be a kamikaze. You have to kind of sacrifice your body. And so what happened was I had 4 concussions over a 15-month period, which essentially ended my college career. And then I had, once you are no longer part of that team, you can't use the facilities. As you know, you can't use the dining hall. And the strength coach at the time said, you spent all your time here anyway. Why don't you take a class for credit, which I did, which was, I think it was Student Strength and Conditioning 101, basically. And that kind of opened my eyes a little bit to the world of strength and conditioning. And then I took an internship. It was really an exchange program in Moscow that really kind of introduced me to what strength and conditioning was really all about. I thought I knew, but I really didn't know anything. And being over there, you got to see the rusty weights. It wasn't really about the weights or the facility. It was really about the programming. That's where I really learned a little bit more about programming. Came back after about 6 months, took an internship at Florida, took a GA position at Florida, left there, took a GA position at Nebraska. Did an internship at the U.S. Olympic Training Center in Lake Placid, and kind of knew where I wanted to do, and I really wanted to go on my own. I really wanted to find out if I could take an athlete from A through Z basically by myself, and I challenged myself to do so, and like as they say, the rest is kind of history.
That's awesome. So a Florida guy moved up to upstate New York. Did you have to do a winter at Lake Placid?
That was brutal.
I bet. I'm from
Yeah.
Rochester, so I could.
Yeah,
I
that
could
was,
just tell you.
I've been a Florida guy all my life and kind of bi-coastal really between here in California, but I've never experienced that kind of winter before. I've never experienced that kind of wind. The wind just cuts right through you.
Oh, yeah.
It was very uncomfortable, but yeah, I knew I couldn't live there. Let's put it this way. I knew that, and that's what, I had a couple of offers in schools that were the Northeast, and I knew there's no way. There's just no way. I'd probably leave. So the best option was, warm climate.
Yeah. Well, it's funny because everybody that was in town in August or July, excuse me, heard Buddy's great thoughts of the area that I grew up in.
Right.
Yeah, once you go warm, it's hard to go back up there.
It
I'll say
is. It
that.
is. It's tough on the bones.
Yeah, well, especially for a guy who's a surfer and a guy who loves the water. So let's get into that. What drew you there? Let's talk about your work there and move through that way.
Yeah, I remember going to the beach, and my father went into a 7-Eleven, and he picked up a styrofoam uh, box. Basically, it was just a kind of a box, really a cooler to put some drinks in. And he picked up a styrofoam surfboard, about maybe a 3 or 4 foot surfboard. Uh, we went out to the beach, and obviously styrofoam surfboards isn't like the best thing, but at least got me in the water. And somebody came over and said, "Hey, he seems to have a knack for it, but you're on the wrong board. You need a real board." And so he lent me a board. It was a small board, and I got up on the first wave. I rode, and the feeling I never forgot. It's a feeling once you stand up on a wave, you just never forget that feeling. And it's a feeling I've been chasing for 40 years. Essentially, that's how long I've been surfing now. And it really was just a love of the ocean. It's a meditative quality. I love the aspect of paddling and just being out there by myself. Sometimes, most of the time, I surf by myself. And then little by little, that just ended up helping one guy here and one guy there. And before I knew it, I was the surf performance coach. And that's not something I planned. Didn't work on it. It just kind of materialized, really.
Yes, and a guy who cut his teeth in Russia. How now do we take what we learned out there and take it to something that they probably don't get to see very often, which is an
No,
athlete in the winter?
yeah, I learned uh, the whole concept of data and numbers and things like that. And I use three things now, which I kind of learned there. I didn't really have some of this, but I use time motion analysis and video. I use GPS and I use heart rate. The time motion for me is really about biomechanics, looking at how someone surfs. And, the dirty little secret in surfing is that everybody has knee pain. Not necessarily knee injuries, but knee pain. And that's because when you surf, if you surf regular foot, that means your left foot as you pop up goes forward and your other foot goes back. You start getting very, very tight in the tissues of the hip because you lose external hip mobility and you lose hip abduction. So you stay very tight in those tissues. And what happens is little by little, the biomechanics of just that gross movement starts beating up the knees. I have torn meniscus. I surf with a meniscus brace. I've seen a bunch of guys do it. It's a kind of a dirty little secret in the sport. Guys that surf professionally, they all have kind of knee pain, not necessarily again knee injuries, but they all have some kind of dysfunction. And so that's what I use the video for in the time motion analysis. Look at the biomechanics of what's going on and try and determine if there's a problem there. And then if there's a pathology, then I refer out. That's not what I do. But my job is to strengthen the joints and make the tissues more tolerable. The GPS was really brand new. That didn't exist back then. But I learned the concept of time motion or time distance and speed, which is what the GPS gives me through Rip Curl's watch. The typical distance surfing could be 1,000 meters. Typical heart rates are 121 to 140, 140 to 160. The average is about 140. So I know that you need to have a robust aerobic system, which is what nobody has when they start surfing. And it's the number one focus for me when I get somebody. The GPS also gives me speed. These guys could be going up to 45. Sometimes the average speed is somewhere between 2 and 33 kilometers per hour. It could be up to 45 if you're on a big wave. So what I really learned over there is getting all that information and kind of putting it together. And I like to use the term that Matt Jordan from the Canadian Sports Institute uses, which is know what matters, measure what matters, and then change what matters. I don't want just data. That data for me is information, and that information has to be actionable. If I can't take action on it, it's noise. And so I want to use that stuff not because it's fancy, but because it gives me numbers that I can turn into information that I can turn into then a training program, and hopefully, a win. If it's a surf contest, if it's a big wave surfer, then turn that into information that gives them the best chance possible at not getting crushed by a 4-story building.
Yeah. So let's piggyback on one thing you just said. Both of us having similar connections. The aerobic talk is obviously something that we've heard from many people. How differently does the aerobic training for a surfer work as, say, opposed to like how you would do for a soccer or a basketball player?
Great question, because 60% of surfing is paddling, right? It's all upper body. And in fact, if you see people start the sport and kind of lose interest really quickly, one of the reasons I notice is that they have just a poor aerobic system. If you can't paddle out to the waves, you can't catch the wave. It's really that simple. And if you can't catch repeated waves in a contest, you're going to lose. It's not a matter of whether there's a chance, you're going to lose. The individual catches the more waves and gets the most scores wins. So, understanding that 60% of surfing is, basically paddling out with an average heart rate of 139, I know by using that GPS and using that heart rate monitor that if I start seeing guys at 85%, and those values, by the way, are somewhere between 54 and I think it's 75% max heart rate. So when I start seeing someone at the 85% heart rate, I know that they don't have the physical capacity to continue to surf. And so I know they haven't been following the program. It's that simple, because most of the stuff I do is remotely, but we're very careful in how we program. So kind of long story or long-winded answer to your question is it's a little different. We do build the aerobic capacity. I do it, obviously by paddling, but we'll do ergometers, we'll do bikes, we'll do whatever it is that makes them comfortable in order to be compliant. If somebody doesn't like to ride the bike, then obviously we don't make them ride the bike. You can only paddle for so long. We do have endurance training where we do paddling from buoy to buoy. Repeat sprints, basically. It's what the soccer team would do, except that it's in the water. And not a lot of scientific literature on surfing. The very few stuff that really exists is upper body swimming ergometers as applied to surfers from swimming and life saving. And so there's really not a lot of stuff out there, Jay, that you can look at and say, hey, I'm going to follow this template, because it doesn't exist. So in many ways, you're designing and creating a template that may or may not work, and you don't know until probably the next season when you look back at your numbers and again the information and the data. You cut the noise away, and what's left, and you start training basically to those numbers. So it's a little bit different, but in the end, one of my goals, and it's my goal with my NFL guys, it's my goal with my special operation guys, is to build as robust an aerobic system as I possibly can. Everything now it's high interval training, which is great, but to recover from those bouts of high intensity, you better have a good, robust aerobic system.
Oh yeah, no doubt. I'm sure we've heard Val say that a billion times.
A few times.
Yeah, when it comes to those conversations.
A few times.
So then, piggybacking in with the land athletes as well, one thing that we have to talk about is decelerative work, deceleration training.
Right.
So let's touch on that. Let's look at that. I think it would be really neat to talk about that with the guys in the water too. But how that, if there is like a crossover between the two, and then maybe what is the differences that you would do with your land mammals versus your aquatic athletes?
Yeah, and how that started for me was the NFL collective bargaining agreement changed in 2011, which changed essentially the amount of time that you had to prepare an athlete off season. And so what you did is you created this smaller box from the box that you originally had, and you eliminated some stuff and you added some stuff. And I think I had 2 guys that had knee injuries. At the very same time, I had 2 special operators that had blown ACLs too. And so I went back and I started to look at my program and tried to find out, because I felt terrible. Is that something that I did? Was it related to the programming? And so I did a Q&A in my programming, and I started to kind of see something, a de-emphasis, if you will, on a particular part of programming. And I know you've had Cal Dietz on it, And obviously, I'm a fan, and I use the triphasic system. But there's something in that Cal said, which was every dynamic movement begins with an eccentric muscle action. And so I was looking at eccentric strength and a couple different things, and I realized it just wasn't an emphasis on my program. And I thought, what if that is the problem? What if that is that the elephant in the room? So I started to basically implement more eccentric strength via the triphasic system, right? A 2-week block of just eccentric strength, just like Cal uses, compound exercises, no greater than 85%. Spot the slow tempos. The tempos at 5-0x, 5 on the eccentric, 0 on the isometric, and the exploding on the concentric. Same thing what I did with the special operators, and really same thing I did with surfers. And a couple things started to happen. One is I have not had a knee injury in any of those guys since 2012. That's not coincidence. I haven't done anything else different. I don't know that they've done anything different. We've been together for those amount of years. And I also noticed that there was guys with knee pain that surf regularly. I surf regular foot. Goofy foot is if you pop on the board and your right foot goes forward, you would have then left knee pain. Those guys didn't have any knee pain. And it's almost like we start to build robustness, not just in the joints, but robustness in the tissues, a greater tolerance, if you will. And so that's sort of kind of how I started to go on this tangent on deceleration. And let's be honest, you can't talk about deceleration, Jay, and you know this, without talking about it in a continuum, right? There's acceleration, there's deceleration, and there's that reacceleration. Primarily those first few steps right out of deceleration. And so you can't just say, okay, well, let's just do deceleration work. And that's not what I'm talking about. What I'm talking about is I looked at my program and I realized that component, I just didn't emphasize. My cueing was different. And to give you an example, in the off-season, early off-season, once we go through our continuum of our plyos are jumping in place, jumping for distance, jumping on a box, and then jumping off a box. The cue for jumping on a box early in the off-season is stick the landing. And that's a cue my guys know. They look back and they know I'm going to stick the landing. As we progress to that special preparation in the beginning of the preseason, the cueing is now explode. But I want them to focus on the landing mechanics too. So I changed a lot of the stuff I did. I did follow a lot of Cal's work, but really I also changed my cueing and how I use the verbiage for cueing on different aspects of the year so that they were able to understand that was a focus, that deceleration was important, landing mechanics was important, and eccentric strength was important. So not just that I added those things, I really had it in there. I just focus and reemphasize it. And it's helped the special operators. Special operators get hurt basically stepping off a Humvee. This is how these guys, I thought I had these guys prepared, but one of the things that you and I can't really take care of is chaos. Chaos just comes in and unwinds everything that you've kind of put together. So it's really about developing a robust athlete that can tolerate all these forces through the addition or the re-emphasizing really of deceleration work. That's basically how it started for me.
That's awesome. And you think that on top of the programming changes, that the cueing has been what's had a extremely profound effect on it?
Huge. Huge, because I know that, again, in the early off season when I started to say stick the landing, guys that would normally, doing jumps for distance, whether it be a broad jump or, hurdles, whatever, they would just jump. And now that cueing forced them to stop, look at their landing mechanics, make sure they were not in valgus, and continue the program until we started to explode on boxes or do death jumps where, explode was the cue, but they did not forget that the whole concept was we're still trying to protect the joint, so stick the landing. It was huge. Absolutely changed everything for me. Cueing is huge.
Yeah, and I think that what's really valuable in that is the fact that it's singular in nature, isn't it? Cal talks about it and Neil talked about it last week, where if you give them one thing to think about, it's like something like 70% compliance. I think this is like the John Bernardi, the precision nutrition stuff.
Correct.
Where it's like one thing, 70%. Two things, it's like down near 50. Three things, you might as well buy a lotto ticket.
Absolutely correct.
Yeah, and it's how simple that is, Are there any other examples that you could give where you found these things have had carryover, where these simple cues have changed your programming and helped any of these athletes?
Really, it started with those, and it was I was I was preparing a presentation for Andrew Hootie at the Midwest Sports Performance Conference, and it was on uh, the dirty little secret in sports performance, which was deceleration. And a lot of it was going back to Brett Bartholomew, right? Brett and I are friends, and I love his work because he puts this huge emphasis on cueing, and so does Nick Winkelman and a couple of Sean Mishka, Lauren Landau. These are guys that I follow and that we're friends, and we'll talk about some of this stuff. It's really about, and you just hit it, Jay, is this individualization of uh, a word, if you will. And for me, that word was, stick the landing. I must have tried out 30 different phrases and nothing seemed to work. And I think it was Sean, I can't remember who it was, that just said, hey, cut it down to maybe 2 or 3 words and see what happens. I was really having a conversation. And like the Berardi model, that was at like 5%. These guys weren't remembering that. So as I kind of reduced that and just hit stick the landing, um, again, just that's just part of the program, but it really started to work. Guys started to remember that. I did not see valgus. We took video, we did motion analysis. It was huge. So I go back to that because it's really the simplest example I can use of having this absolutely humongous effect on everything else that you did. The guys might have progressed through plyos and reactive agility, but they never forgot that. They always forgot that the deceleration component of stop and go, stop and react. The most important part was you have to hit the brakes first, and then you can go and reaccelerate. That was it's for me. It changed my program completely. It really did.
Oh, that's fantastic. Well, then let's jump back a little bit here, more here, and talk about that time motion stuff that you do with the cameras and the
Mm-hmm.
biomechanics. How does that affect programming, and how does that mix in with both this and then the aerobic stuff that you were talking about prior?
Right. So the time motion and the video analysis again it shows that a good example again going back to surfing that 60% of surfing is paddling. If you didn't know that, you figure, well, it's just an aerobic sport, and you spend a certain amount of time surfing the wave. It's a surfing sport. It's really a paddling sport, is what it is, because you have to get past the white water, past where the waves break. You start to see really what I use it for, and what I think it really helps me is biomechanics. Is seeing what kind of biomechanics somebody has paddling. You're in a hyperextended state, so thoracic mobility is absolutely critical and huge. It is for all sports, absolutely critical for a surfer, as is hip mobility, the two things that we work with. The two things that I don't need to do that much time motion analysis anymore, unless it's someone new, because I know exactly what I'm going to get. I'm going to correct hip mobility, and I'm going to correct thoracic mobility on everybody, including myself, because I know what it is. You're going to be that 60% paddling time, you're going to be in a hyperextended state. And if you don't have endurance, your muscles start screaming out, and you're done. So if you're a recreational surfer, you're done in 30 minutes. If you're a competitive surfer, you're going to lose. And if you're a big wave surfer, you're going to get crushed under the weight of a 4-story building. And then good luck with that. So that really, for me, is understanding the biomechanics of surfing, the biomechanics of movement. I use the term movement fidelity. I want someone to be and to have and to continue to have quality of movement in a fatigued state. I don't care if you're a surfer, if you're rucking with a 70-pound pack as a special operator, or you're a defensive back, with 2 minutes to go in the fourth quarter. Everybody has to have that movement quality, and hopefully not break down under the guise of fatigue. That's huge, and that's sports, and that's performance, and that's what you and I do. It's so that's basically a kind of long-winded story on the time motion and what I use it for. And again, I want information. I don't want noise, and sometimes it gives me a lot of noise. The distance, I may not be able to do a lot of that stuff with the distance, But the biomechanics and the speed, and again heart rate and stuff like that, it's invaluable.
No, that's awesome. So, have there ever been any examples of things that you were looking at that turned out to be noise that you thought were shining lights on things?
Yeah, so I thought the one of the things that the GPS catches is the number of waves caught, right? And so obviously, if you're in a heat where you're surfing against another individual, the more waves you catch, the better chance you have of getting a better score. But it didn't really do anything for me as far as programming. And I kept looking at it, and I probably sat on some data for a year. And somebody said, "Hey, so what does all that mean?" And I said, "I have no idea." And when I actually started to put it together, I realized there was no actionable. It was information, it was data, but there wasn't anything actionable on it. They didn't catch any waves because there were no waves. And so that's the thing with surfing is that there's an environmental component. If you get a wave every 9 seconds, that's a good day. But you may be out there for 20 minutes, and your sets are coming every 5 or 7 minutes. So where you surf these heats around the world is going to affect how many waves you catch. So that was a piece of information that again, it became noise. I tried to do something with it. There was no actionable action with it, and I basically just put it to the side. I still use it. I kind of want to see how many waves guys catch, but it doesn't turn into anything in reference to program design for me.
No, and you know what? That's an awesome spot to put it right there. Is so many people, because data is so sexy right now.
Absolutely, yeah.
It takes so much stuff, and they just look at it and they're like, huh? But if you can't do anything with it, it's best to just stop taking it. And
It's noise.
yeah, that is a fantastic point and a fantastic spot to end an awesome talk. George, thank you so much, man. This is killer. And it's a
Awesome.
great insight to really a realm of sport that I think a lot of coaches may not really understand, but can help them quite a bit. This is sweet, man. Thank you so much.
You got to thank you, Jay. And
Yeah.
one of the things I love about your podcast, I know we talked a little bit about it, was that it's not the script, right? It's a conversation. I think, and I've told you that the magic happens in the conversations, and I appreciate that. I think there's magic in every single podcast I've heard. So thank you.
Well, thanks, man. I appreciate that. And we'll be in touch real soon, brother. Thank
You
you.
got it. Thank you.
And a huge thanks again to Carvajal Performances, Jorge Carvajal, for taking the time to sit down and talk with us today. An obvious, completely different sport with some awesome characteristics to it that you can look at how George identifies things to train and how he monitors his athletes and take and move it to team sport athletes, looking for things that are unique and building on them. I think that's absolutely fascinating. And again, another awesome example of a coach doing some self-reflection to then improve what he's doing or she's doing for their athletes and improve themselves professionally. Tons of great gems in this talk, guys. Absolutely awesome nuggets of information. Can't thank George enough. And I hope you guys enjoyed the talk as much as I did. And if you did, please share it in the social media outlet of your choice. We're just trying to keep discussions moving, conversations going, and questions being asked, guys. So thank you for all you do for us here at Central Virginia Sport Performance. We will be back next week with another awesome guest. We will see you then.